the Start Your Own Business podcast. Hear inspiring startup stories and get reliable expert advice on how to start your business and get off to the best possible start. Brought to you by Startup Donut, helping small businesses succeed.
Hi there, thanks for joining us and welcome to the Start Your Own Business podcast. My name's Fiona and I'm your host. Freelancing is nothing new. In fact, the term was coined hundreds of years ago to describe mercenary knights who freely sold their lance fighting skills. Today, there are more than 2 million freelancers in the UK working across most sectors, but they do tend to be more common in some sectors than others. Although things have been tough for UK freelancers for some years, the signs are that the UK freelance population is beginning to grow again. You might be considering going freelance yourself, either to earn additional side hustle income or perhaps as a way to leave your current job behind and to leap fully into the freelance self-employment. People choose to go freelance for many reasons, and there are both pros and cons, as well as some common pitfalls you need to avoid. To help you get the tips you need on how to start and run a successful freelance business, I'll be speaking to Sophie Cross, founder of Freelancer Magazine. For many years, Sophie was a freelance content creator and marketer, so she's able to draw on lots of first-hand experience. Before we meet Sophie, let's find out more about the sponsor of this episode, Sage, and how Copilot can help freelancers and other small businesses just like you.
To be honest, work had been a slog. I'm a designer, but some nights I was chasing invoices like my full-time job. Now Sage Copilot chases my invoices for me. I just need to click a button and it's done. And I get paid 1 week faster.
Sage Copilot is built with over 40 years of experience helping real businesses like Sophia at Solver Design. That's more than artificial intelligence, that's authentic intelligence. Search Sage Copilot to learn more. Working with 21 customers, each round payments came in 7 days faster with Sage Copilot. T's and C's apply.
It's now time to meet our guest, Sophie Cross, founder of Freelancer Magazine. Thanks for joining us, Sophie.
Thank you for having me.
I wanted to start by asking you a little bit about your background. So you were a freelance yourself for many years, both as a content writer and as a marketer. So how did that come about?
I basically always wanted to start my own business, and I was working in corporate at the time. It just didn't feel like quite the right fit for me. I wanted to be able to make decisions myself. I wanted to kind of own a brand. And I'd always wanted to start my own business, and I was writing business plans for florists, sausage and mash restaurants, like you name it. I was coming up with ideas the whole time. And I had a kind of light bulb moment, I think, one day on my extremely long commute around the South Circular. And I thought, I could be a marketer. Like, I could freelance as a marketer and that would be my own business. I already know how to do it. And the startup costs are really low. So I was like, right, this is it. I'm going to kind of take the leap. And yeah, that's how I got into freelancing.
So how long were you freelancing for? Was that something that lasted a few years?
So I still freelance now. It's been 13 years. So yeah, run the magazine and still freelance.
I wanted to ask you about the magazine. So obviously it's something that you founded yourself, the Freelancer Magazine. So what led you to launch the magazine? What was the driver for that?
It was a pandemic baby. So a lot of my clients, my background's in travel and hospitality. And so the nature of that was that a lot of my freelance clients, or all of them probably, were in travel and hospitality. And I was living in rural Somerset for a few years and decided it was time to move back to the big smoke. And as lovely as it was kind of living in Somerset, and I was doing a lot of copywriting, I just really felt like I wanted to get my teeth back into attending more in-person events and being in London a bit more often than I was, and getting back into a bit more marketing. So I moved back, must have been, the dates all get mixed up now, don't they? But January 2020, and yeah, was raring to go. And then by March, I'd lost all of my clients because obviously the travel and hospitality industry, just everyone, pulled all their marketing budgets, didn't know what was going on. And I started making online marketing courses, and I knew I could either target them at the travel and hospitality industry who wouldn't really be interested in that sort of thing at the time, or in small businesses and freelancers, because that was the other market that I knew about. And the magazine actually came as an idea for how to market the courses. So I wanted to raise my profile as someone who knew about marketing for freelancers. And I was trying to kind of rack my brains as to, would it be a podcast? Would it be a newsletter? And I kind of thought, zig when the world zags. There was so much online. I realised that there wasn't a print magazine for freelancers. And I decided to make it. So, yeah, that's what happened.
And the rest is history, as they say.
Indeed.
So for someone who's not familiar with the magazine, what kind of content are you covering? What would someone expect to find in a typical issue?
So we say it's for B2B and creative freelancers, and it's lots of business advice, marketing advice. We have experts writing columns about everything from creativity to AI for freelancers, LinkedIn, lots of different features every month, but really business related. And it's a big community as well. The community's always been, from day one. It was launched via Kickstarter. We do virtual co-working 3 times a week. So it's about a place to meet people. It's a place to get inspiration. And whether you want to do that by coming to an event or reading in the print magazine or reading the digital version, more than a magazine, we'd like to think.
So moving on to the kind of main topic of today's episode, going freelance, is that something that's still popular in the UK?
Yes, absolutely. I think, more and more students are, graduating, going freelance or already freelancing when they're at university. I think that working remotely, working flexibly is just becoming more and more popular, and we're seeing employers trying to bring that in more. But I think so many people are just choosing to work for themselves and specialize and offer their services out to brands. And it's certainly not in decline.
And are there common drivers for someone to decide to go freelance in your experience?
I think for the generation that are graduating now, it's almost one of the more obvious choices, which maybe it wasn't, a generation or 2 ago, and I think that sometimes people have fallen into it. They might have been in a toxic workplace and had to leave and then decided to give it a go, come back from maternity leave, just wanted more flexible hours, or, just seen a gap in the market. So, I think that there's many reasons to get into it, but it's definitely becoming more of a first option than a kind of fallback option.
Yeah. So being freelance is just another way really of describing someone who's self-employed, but the term freelance is used, I suppose, in some sectors more than others, and those tend to be the kind of creative sectors. Yeah.
I mean, officially you would be a freelance plumber, I suppose, or a freelance electrician or a freelance hairdresser. And I don't know if that kind of works to its detriment sometimes, that, people kind of tend to say, well, I'm just a freelancer, and we're really trying to change that narrative. And really the main focus of the magazine is to connect people, but also to make freelancers realise that they're business owners. And I think, that is one of the most important things you need to do as a freelancer, is see yourself as a business.
Yeah, and sort of work to make sure that people, around you take that seriously as well. I think sometimes there can be a kind of misconception that, because you're freelance, it's a bit more kind of woolly than being in a kind of employed role.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if it helps you to create a brand, create a limited company, call yourself a consultant, if that helps you and your mindset, and if that's kind of what's going to appeal to your target market as well, then absolutely, that might be the right choice for you. But we're trying to make sure that also freelancer isn't kind of seen as a dirty word, and if there's, the work isn't free because it's freelancing.
Yeah, absolutely. You've mentioned some of the reasons why people might go freelance, and there are some obvious benefits, as you've mentioned. If you're just coming back into the workplace because you've been on maternity or paternity leave, or because you've got out of a situation that's not working for you in a sort of employed environment. But that doesn't mean that freelancing is going to be right for everybody, does it?
No, absolutely not. And it's a lot, especially when you first go into it, you end up being every role. So if you're moving from an employed role, you don't have HR or finance or a sales team to kind of get you work and things like that. So I think that can be really overwhelming for people. And, to be able to kind of do the client work and deliver the client work and also think about marketing yourself for the future at the same time. There's a running joke that's kind of like, I love the flexibility. I get to choose which 16 hours a day I work. Or, you can, there's a big danger of becoming your own worst boss. You would never, a lot of the time, maybe not giving yourself enough holiday or not taking enough holiday. And you end up thinking to yourself, but I would never tolerate a boss telling me that, I could take 10 days a year holiday. So I think that well-being and all of those things, have to be taken really seriously when you start working for yourself. I think that sometimes people go into it and they think, oh, this is amazing. Like, I don't have to commute anymore and I get to work from home. And maybe it doesn't suit some people to work in a shared office space or all sorts of different things. But it is easy to burn out if you don't kind of make sure that things are sustainable quite early on.
Yeah. About building in those protections for yourself, because like you say, you suddenly, particularly if you've come from an employed background, suddenly you're having to wear every hat going, and it's you that's responsible for the success or failure of your business. And if you've got people reliant on your income, that's a kind of pressure that you sort of have to kind of manage.
For sure. Yeah.
There are some obviously some pros and cons, and you've mentioned some of those, but there are other ones as well. Things like there's no sick pay. If you decide to go on holiday, you haven't got the backup of an employer paying you to have that time off. There's any other kind of sort of pitfalls and things that people need to be mindful of before they consider going freelance that you would want to point out to people?
Yeah, and those absolutely have to be taken into account when you're working out your pricing. They do need to be included. And of course, working out how to pay yourself consistently on inconsistent income is really important. Having a buffer in place for those quieter periods, or if you're looking to go freelance, having a pot in place. And it isn't just because you might have a fallow period and you need to pay yourself and you need to make sure your bills are paid. That's that absolutely is something you need to put in place, but it's also because it will help you make better decisions. So if you have that buffer, if you have that savings, you're not feeling like you have to say yes to everything, and it can kind of cloud your judgment a bit. I think if you're always feeling like you're in a place of scarcity, or that actually having that savings pot and making sure that you've got your money set aside for your tax as well are really, really important for, making good decisions about your business as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, a point there that you raised actually is that some people assume that by going freelance, it's going to be like the magic key to suddenly being sort of swimming in cash that you've generated for yourself. But that's not necessarily the case, is it? Life doesn't necessarily become easier. Income doesn't necessarily shoot through the roof just because you're starting to work for yourself. No,
and I think there's absolutely a mindset thing. It's very common, I think, for people to come into freelancing and undercharge and over deliver. And it comes back to seeing yourself as a business again, I think. So really having a think about before you start, or having a relook if you've already started at who you want your target market to be. And based on, you're probably going to want to pick a target market who have budget, that are paying for the services, the type of services that you want to offer, and having a think about what those services are, how you could maybe package them up, value-based pricing instead of pricing by the hour, all of these things. So of course there's going to be a trial and error period, a testing period at the beginning, and things are going to have to constantly evolve. But I think having a business plan or a mini business plan in place for yourself, where you have thought about these things just as you would if you were to set up any other business. I think because of my hospitality background, I like to use a restaurant analogy a lot of the time, and think if you were going to set up a restaurant, you wouldn't not be thinking about kind of what your niche was and what your menu looked like, and, taking careful consideration of your costs and what things you needed to outsource. And you would hopefully really be thinking about how you were going to market it and tell people, and know that you would have to do that as a consistent habit. And I think sometimes when, the freelancing, we're very personally attached to it, and setting those boundaries between, our personal life and our professional life, and kind of stepping away from, you're marketing yourself, you're not marketing this separate entity. It can be really difficult, but I think it's a mindset shift. And if you don't have it, which, it doesn't come naturally to lots of us, it's maybe not going to change overnight, but definitely something that you can work towards.
So what tips have you got for people on how to go about setting realistic prices? Because obviously when you first start out, you're keen obviously to try and get your first sort of contracts and jobs under your belt. But as you mentioned, it's quite easy to sort of underprice and over-deliver. So have you got any tips for people on how to work out what are realistic prices for the service that they're offering?
Yeah, I think there are, depending on what service you do, there are reports online. So for instance, I know if you're a copywriter, pro copywriters publish a report every year. They do a survey. So you can have a look by and large what, for example, a junior copywriter, a senior copywriter is actually charging. I'd say become part of communities, and, not necessarily because you're going to put in that community, does, 400 quid sound like a fair price? Because I think that's, social media platforms or kind of community platforms aren't probably the best place to ask things like that, because you don't know, other people don't know how much experience you've got and how good you are at your job, and, what the client's willing to pay and things like that. So, but I think just that support will start to give your confidence and start to kind of get your money mindset going. And I don't think that it's to say, never do work that kind of is free or cheap, but you really have to be gaining some benefits from that. And, you really have to be kind of thinking what the advantages are. But, I think one bit of advice is you think of a number and it's probably too low. They say, don't they? Kind of, if you don't feel a bit uncomfortable sending it, you've probably gone too low. And I think, there's some clients that are always going to think something's too cheap, and some clients are going to think something's too expensive. So you almost might as well err on the side of being a bit expensive. I think that, being cheap does tend to bring out some of the red flag clients. And actually, if a client kind of values your service and is willing to pay, then, that's a better target market for you to be going after. So yes, there is going to be an element of kind of sticking your finger in the air at first. And I think, it would be lying if we said that none of us made any mistakes, but I think it's about not making the same mistake twice. And I think that another thing to remember is it's probably unlikely a client or a prospect is going to come back to you and say, that's way too expensive, I'm never speaking to you again. They're probably going to ask if there's any room for maneuver if it feels too high for them. So err on the side of really valuing what you're offering a client, thinking about the value that it's going to deliver to them, and have confidence in yourself.
Yeah, I guess it's that know your worth kind of phrase, isn't it?
For sure, yeah.
I mean, I know lots of people who are freelance, and I know another common problem that they experience is kind of creep. So they're asked to quote for a job, they'll put the quote in, yes, they get the job. And then, particularly with things like, writing or web design or creative work, like, can you just also do this? Or can you give us an alternative for that? And before you know it, you're not making any money on a project because you've gone beyond what the original bounds of the contract were, or because you hadn't included, well, if the add-ons are, if you want to do this, that will be an extra, and that you've not given yourself any room to kind of cover those additional costs that you take on board.
Yeah, and I think one of the most important things you can do, and if you can start to work on this or have this in place before you start freelancing, is a client onboarding process. And that can include, working out what you're packaging and working out your prices, what your prices are, and templates for emails for all of these things, so that you don't have to think too much about it and you can just send the email. Having the contract in place and having terms that you send to your client and that are kind of even explaining things like, these are my working hours, I don't, if people are kind of asking you to be on WhatsApp and things like that, kind of, you can really put these things in place. And I think that it doesn't make you look difficult, it just makes you look more professional. A client wants to have confidence in you, confidence that you're the professional, confidence that you're going to take the lead. And I think if you can put a client onboarding process in place to protect yourself, to have these contracts, a template to say, actually, it's, if there's 2 rounds of amends in the contract, but if you'd like to pay for any more. And I think, again, these are mistakes that, we all make, but just taking that time to work like in your business, like on your business, not in your business. So putting these things in place are going to save you so much time and effort and sort of trauma in the future. So yeah, client onboarding process is absolutely a priority, like one of the biggest priorities. And I think one of the things that most people kind of drop the ball on. And then a client offboarding process as well, so that you're making sure that you are getting testimonials, are getting feedback, and maybe put those case studies together. You're making sure that you can follow up if there's any more work, or you've got reminders in place to go back to them in X amount of time and ask them if they've got another project coming up or suggesting something, asking for referrals. These are all things that we should be doing, but it's really difficult to keep on top of that if you haven't put a system or a process in place for yourself.
Yeah. Have you got any advice for people on notice periods? Because this is another thing that knowing, people who work for themselves in advance, that because you're not under a contract in the same way as an employee, is that it can be easier for firms to try and sort of shake you off without any notice period. So have you got any advice for people on notice periods and how they can use those to protect both themselves and the client?
Yeah, I think that it's your choice as a freelancer. So if you are working on a retainer basis, in which case you would be looking at something like this, then absolutely it makes sense to have something in your contract that says, there's a 3-month notice period or 2 months notice period or 6-month notice period or whatever feels appropriate. And I think it's also about having these discussions with the client in the first place and being transparent. I think that there's little point going into a business relationship with somebody that you don't feel comfortable to have these conversations about money, about what their payment terms are, explaining that these are the payment terms in your contract, explaining that that you need work turned around in a certain amount of time, and explaining kind of why that is and what would happen otherwise, and it might delay the projects and things like that. I think as much as you can get in place like that, and equally sometimes it might benefit the freelancer not to have a notice period in place if you also want the flexibility of kind of not working for that client. But it depends on how many projects you've got on the go. If you are wanting to do one-off projects, if you're wanting to do retainer projects, but I would say it would definitely be sensible to try and build a notice period into your contract.
Yeah, that's really good tips there. So when you're working for yourself as a freelancer, you can either operate as a sole trader or you can set up a limited company, can't you? So both are quite easy to do, but obviously there's still tax implications whichever route you go down. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm not an accountant. Just put that out there now, and I have an accountant for this reason. My understanding, but please do check what the latest is, or talk to an accountant. And I think you'll find a lot of accountants are willing to have a free consultation call with you. And we do have some free resources about things like this on the Freelancer Magazine website as well. So there's a finance section. But I think the kind of rule of thumb is at about 30k income. There are tax benefits of going limited. So most people do go limited at that point to get those tax allowances, get the tax benefits. people do it earlier as well. Like I went limited straight away. I just felt that I wanted to create that separation between myself and the business.
Yeah.
And, really feel like I had a brand and, absolutely, I don't think to do it earlier is, there probably are some slight tax implications, but that will depend on other things as well. So I think it is really best to talk to an accountant. But yeah, I mean, whether you're a sole trader or limited, I would say a number one piece of advice is set up a separate business account. Do not be trying to run your business through, your personal account and working out the money.
Yeah, it can get quite messy quite quickly.
For sure, yeah. And, something that I don't have in place for both of my businesses, but I think the accounts that can allow you to set up the pots are just really great for being able to put a buffer aside, being able to put some tax aside, being able to kind of put your costs aside or marketing budget. So yeah, I would look into an account that probably has that pot functionality.
Yeah, I think the key difference I think to make for listeners is that if you're operating as a sole trader rather than as a limited company, it's you that's responsible for any debts of the company. And so if things don't go to plan, it's on your head. Whereas if you're a limited company, it has a separate legal identity, so there are benefits to doing it that way, particularly as your business grows. But again, like you say, making that point and at what point you make that decision will depend on where the kind of financial benefit works for you. So you can use calculators and again speak to your accountant about that to make sure that you make the right decision for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say that even if you do go limited, make sure that you get business insurance in place.
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, we all, you think you've got a plan in your head of this is how my business is going to go, and then things pop up, and COVID is one of those examples. You had lots of people who are running their own business, and then within a few weeks everything shut down and you can't trade. So yes, yeah, prepare for the unexpected if you possibly can.
Yeah, absolutely.
If someone was thinking, they're sat at home now thinking, I'm thinking I want to start my own business and go freelance, how important is it, would you say, for them to have some kind of work set up or, a foreseen income stream coming in before they make that leap?
I think it's really important. I know people that haven't, and I would probably fall into that category, but I think either having work set up or, a 6-month buffer that you can cover your costs is really, really important. And I don't really see any reason why you shouldn't have those things in place. I mean, there might be a little bit of, it might be a little bit tricky if you're currently employed. So that might be a reason that, it might be tricky to kind of get things lined up for the future. But, if there's a conflict of interest. But I think that, other than that, put that business plan in place. And, it's not necessarily going to get easier when when you've started. So really start telling people as soon as possible what you're doing, or contact agencies or contact people that you could potentially partner with. But I think anything that you can do to test your idea, get things in place, set up that client onboarding process. And, these things, you're not sort of going to have more time than before you start. As soon as you start, you're going to be so focused on doing the work.
Yeah.
And, the things like the website and the marketing and, and again, it's like you might have a real great influx of work in the first 6 months. And if you don't keep those processes and that marketing habit in place while you're busy, then that's when you're going to come a bit of a cropper, because the lead time of new clients can vary greatly. And I think one of the things that freelancers complain about the most is the kind of inconsistent income and inconsistent work. But the first thing to make sure you have to counteract that is a consistent marketing habit.
In your experience, what's the best way for a freelancer to go about finding work? Is there a kind of a surefire way that you would fall back on when you were freelance yourself?
Yeah, I think as a marketing channel, social media channel, it will depend a little bit on what the services are you're offering, where your target market is. But LinkedIn is still a great channel. I'm definitely seeing freelancers getting leads from there, getting work from there, and almost having an instant effect once they've been proactive on that channel for a month or two. I'd say just don't ignore the obvious though, and the obvious is often emailing or DMing everyone you know, everyone that you've worked with in the past, and telling them what you're doing. And also, as we spoke about before, any client work that you've had or you've got, trying to be proactive about foreseeing other projects that they might do, suggesting other services that you might be able to offer them, following up with them. I think there's just often, a bit of embarrassment or, pressing send on that email, but it really does become a probability game. And I think that all of the times that I've kind of gone, I'm not sure whether to go back to this client, and they've been like, oh, I'm so glad that you've asked that, or I'm so glad that you pointed that out, or yeah, we do have something coming up. Asking those clients if they've got referrals. I think just staying in touch with people, and don't let that kind of low-hanging fruit of people that you've already worked with or people that you already know kind of pass you by. After that, growing that business network, whether that's online, whether that's going to events, whether that's joining communities, just keep growing it and keep kind of making contact with people and keep reminding people what you do, because, it's just so easy. I think people don't think, I'm going to put on LinkedIn a post about what it is I actually do. And people need reminding like the whole time. I don't think, people often think, oh gosh, I've heard from them too much, unless you're emailing people every week. So just press send on that email, see it like a bit of a probability game, enjoy relationship building. Don't see it as kind of sales as such, but just, enjoy relationship building with people. And I think having a niche really helps as well. Like I think there's a bit of a pro niche against niche thing going on, but I definitely sit in the pro niche camp, and I think that it's something that a lot of people, when they start freelancing, go, I don't want to narrow down my options. I don't want to narrow down my options for kind of my work or my target market. And your niche doesn't have to be a service or a target market. Often it might be an industry or a specialism, but it could be the style in which you work in. But I think you've got to have something that makes you memorable. You've got to have something, people will think of referring you, like if you're a copywriter, I think it's really easy. It's easy for people to forget that you're a copywriter. If you specialize in copywriting for pharmacies, I think it makes more sense to people, and it makes you more memorable that actually if another copywriting job comes up for a vet or a hairdresser or people are probably thinking, actually, I know they do it for pharmacies. I wonder if that's, that's transferable.
Yeah.
So I think contrary to niching, limiting you, I think it's going to make you more memorable. You're going to know where to, target your audience. Like you're going to be able to find people. And I think that's another mistake that people can make, kind of going networking just with their peers. It's a really easy thing to do, to kind of go to the networking events with other freelancers, which is really lovely. And absolutely, it can lead to referrals. But if you are, a service provider for accountants, make sure you're going to networking events with accountants, because, you're going to potentially get a lot more work from that than you are going to networking events with your peers. But yeah, I would say do try and have a niche. It will also make your content easier to produce. It'll be easier to position yourself as an expert and know what CPD you want to go and do. So yeah, I think things like this, having a niche, having some systems and processes in place are really the foundations. I think that often a year or so down the line, people start to think, oh gosh, this isn't working anymore. But you really need to have those foundations in place in the first place to kind of have a strong, sustainable freelance business.
And what about, there's lots of platforms that people can join, if they're tradesperson, they can get listed there. Would you suggest that people join those, that they can be worthwhile?
I think our community personally doesn't tend to go through those sites. I think that it's probably better, that I don't want to write them off completely, but I think that it tends to kind of be known as a bit of a race to the bottom. But I think that can depend a bit on, if you're really specialist in an area, or, you're really offering something that maybe there's not many other people on the site that are doing that, or you really have nailed, being able to kind of produce something quickly. I think it's that age-old thing, isn't it, of like, it's not going to be high quality, fast and cheap, like you can choose. So it's also like, you're not going to get clients that are, really good clients, pay really well, and I don't know, from those types of sites. So I think, again, join communities of other people doing what you're doing and see what they recommend. People are really generous with their knowledge, especially freelancers. It's not, it's definitely a kind of rising tide lifts all boats. So I hear horror stories about kind of third-party freelancing websites more than I hear success stories.
Yeah. So I guess it goes back to that thing about knowing your niche and where you're more likely to find those good quality clients that are looking for someone in your niche.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think these days, especially, having due diligence, like putting due diligence in place for yourself, because I think that there can be so many people sending kind of scam inquiries these days, or trying to get people to do work for free. If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. And try and put a checklist in place for yourself as you learn these things. I think, people today are certainly taking deposits, if not getting paid up front. It's a savvy thing to do. And I think that if someone doesn't want to do that, if they want the work turned around very quickly, if there's a kind of red flag, it probably is. But certainly kind of try and look at people's LinkedIn profiles, look at their websites, see if it does definitely feel genuine to you. If it's too good to be true, it probably is. And put due diligence in place for yourself. And that goes for, whether you're doing it through a third party, an agency, or getting inquiries direct.
Yeah. One of the points you made there about getting deposits and money up front leads me on to another kind of issue that's really key for small businesses, because they often don't have the same backup as someone is employed, is the importance of cash flow and invoicing, and making sure that you stay on top of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, enjoy sending an invoice. Again, I think at the beginning it can be a little bit scary to press send on those invoices. I mean, I absolutely love it now. And I love receiving invoices. I love paying people quickly, because I think that that's a really great way to
builds trust.
Builds trust and builds relationships. So I think if I don't expect to not do that for other people, so I don't expect people not to do that for me. And I do know that if you're working for a really large corporation, sometimes there are 60-day payment terms. I think it's always worth having a conversation to see if those, if there's any flexibility on those, because it's nothing worse than kind of getting to 65 days, chasing up that invoice, and someone saying, oh, it hasn't been gone through yet, it's going to be 60 days. So I think don't ever be afraid to chase. Just, again, it should just become kind of part of your system or your process. If you want to have a separate email that says, finance at such and such, then, that might make it a bit easier. But I think it's always good to kind of be as transparent as possible. And I would always ask a client kind of who it will be that I'm sending that invoice to, because often there's a separate finance department or separate accounts department. And I don't want to find that out, actually that the person that's
the day the money's due to land in your bank account.
Yeah. Or, you send the invoice to the finance person and they say, oh, this hasn't got a PO number on it.
Yeah.
And then you're kind of back to square one. So I think, it's always just worth making friends with the finance person and just saying to the client, or having that part of you as part of your onboarding process.
Yeah.
Who would it be sending it to? Do I need a PO number? What information do you need on the invoice before you've even started the work?
Yeah.
And I think, again, by telling a client your process up front and saying, so at this stage, I take 25% deposit or 50% deposit. And then after this long, it's another 25%. And then we can start on the next bit of work. And if a client doesn't fit into those terms, then absolutely, you can make the choice as well. And I think that, but often it gives the right clients the confidence in you as a business owner. And, I take it back to the restaurant thing. You wouldn't kind of sit in a restaurant and expect to go, oh, but can I just pay this in 60 days? So, I think absolutely keep on top of it. It's such an important part. Yeah, you wouldn't expect to walk into a shop and not pay for something. So, and if people do not want to have the money chats, that should be a red flag.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think these days, actually, modern accounting software will do a lot of the reminders for you. If you feel a little bit kind of icky about making the call, you can set it up so it will send the reminders. Don't forget, this is due in 7 days or what have you. So, there are things that can help you streamline that process and eliminate the risk or minimize the risks of companies taking the mickey and going, oh, well, the check's in the post kind of excuse that you used to get back in the day,
Yeah, absolutely.
So, no, definitely keep on top of it, because at the end of the day, it's your money we're talking about. If you want to be able to keep going in business, you need the cash flow back through into your coffers rather than sitting in someone else's bank account.
Yeah, and more often than not, it's just kind of slipped, or I still follow up with clients if they're going to pay me in 30 days. I ask for 7 days payment terms, because I think if you ask for 30 days, then you're not even going to get your invoice looked at until 30 days often. And if the invoice hasn't been paid in 30 days, even with clients that I've been working for 10 years, I'll drop them an email on day 31 and say, oh, just chasing this up. And then, they'll go, oh, I'm so sorry, it's going in the payment. Yeah, it's going in the payment run in a couple of days. And, if they're the right type of client, that's the attitude that, you should be getting.
Yeah, exactly. So we've talked obviously about cash flow and invoicing. What other pitfalls do people need to look out for when they're starting up as a freelance?
I think, the first thing to do is to make sure there is a market for what you want to offer, to make sure, that there are good clients out there, that they do have budget, that they have a look at your competitors. If there are people out there doing what you're doing and seeming to do well, then there's probably a market for what you want to do. But don't kind of go into it thinking, oh, I'll just see what happens. So try and make a plan, and absolutely, you're going to have to be adaptable. You're going to have to evolve. I think that I haven't really ever stopped thinking about what's next and how I might have to kind of change my business. And that can sometimes be quite exhausting. But I think that, we have to appreciate that we are the most agile business owners as people of, businesses of one. So I think, don't not put a plan in place because you're scared it's going to change. Like, have a plan. I think people are kind of scared to commit because they think, oh, what if I don't like this in 6 months' time? And actually, it's better to have a plan, find out you don't like it, know why you don't like it, and be able to kind of make a more strategic change because of that, than not trying to commit to anything in the first place. people don't mind if you change direction. Like, no one's going to remember, no one's going to notice if you update your LinkedIn bio. No one else is going to be losing any sleep over it. So I would say try and make some decisions based on some research, some knowledge, have a think about, what's in demand, what you want to do, where you genuinely feel like you're going to add value to a client. And yeah, don't not make a decision because you're scared that you're going to have to change.
Yeah. I think another kind of pitfall that I've seen with friends is that they have an idea and they get all excited, hand in their notice, set up their freelance business, and then they haven't really thought about how long it takes for your business to become established. You might have a promise of a couple of bits of jobs, but actually it can take some time to reach kind of sustainable level of sales. And if you haven't got that kind of fallback pot that you talked about earlier, it can be kind of the end of your business before you've even got off the ground.
Yeah. And I think having, that plan in place, having that fallback pot in place, having those networks and communities, using LinkedIn, making sure you've got a daily marketing habit. And actually that's the first thing you do in the morning, because none of us want to kind of start doing it at, 4:00. Oh, I'm going to do it now. So, and I think also as a business owner, you're not going to know how to do everything. You're not going to be brilliant at everything. You have to think that, there are things that you are going to have to learn and the things you're going to have to work at. We're not naturally good at all of these things. So you are either going to have to outsource them, which is obviously going to generate more costs.
Yeah.
Or you're going to have to learn how to do it. It's just not possible that you can go, oh, I'm just not, I'm not good at sales. I'm not good at marketing. That's a fundamental part of business. So, and I think that actually often when people get into it and learn how to do it in the right way and find the right channels for them, that it can actually become really enjoyable. And when you start making it about the people that you want to serve and not making it about yourself, then things like that can become really enjoyable.
Another thing that I wanted to ask you about is that obviously when you're working as a freelancer, you're working on your own, and that can be quite lonely and quite isolating. Have you got tips for people on how they can kind of combat that feeling?
Yeah, I think it's definitely about being part of communities and leave the house when you can. I think often it still happens to me that, you've got to the point that you're starting to go a bit stir crazy before you've kind of noticed. So I now will look ahead at my calendar, and often I have got sort of networking events or marketing community events that I go to in the evenings. But if I don't, I'm saying to myself that I'm going to co-work from somewhere once a week. So I think, obviously going to a cafe can be really helpful, but what I've found is that lots of places do offer like co-working days now, or there's co-working clubs, and it's actually really nice to go maybe when another community that you're part of is at the co-work space. So you're not just going to a co-work space and still not talking to anybody. So yeah, there's co-work crew that I know have a few locations around the country, and they're adding more. Communities like Being Freelance, the marketing meetup, there's tons. So have a look at what's available in your area. Actually, if there isn't something, then set up your own event. But yeah, I am part of lots of different events and lots of different communities where you can go to watch presentations, and then there's a networking thing, and then that's a really great way to meet people and say, oh, do you ever co-work from anywhere? Yeah, business communities in your area, like around here we have Northern Affinity, and they do co-work days. And yeah, it's just something that I've recently started doing myself. Like I was going to a co-work space, but sometimes, yeah, you can still end up not talking to people unless you go there, quite regularly.
Find yourself a seat and you pop your headphones in and crack on with your work, and actually you may as well be working at home.
Yeah, for sure. But online communities are also great. The Being Freelance has a really great online community, and to have a network on LinkedIn, is brilliant. But I think for me personally, getting out of the house if you work from home and actually just seeing other people, being around other people, being able to have lunch with other people and chat to other people a bit is really, really important. And yeah, find a space that works for you. And again, accept the fact that there might be a bit of trial and error there, because I've tried lots of different co-working spaces. I've gone from home office to renting an office to all, another co-working space. And it's not a failure if these things don't work. You just have to try them.
And that's the beauty, I suppose, of being freelancers, that you've got the freedom to be agile and try things out. That doesn't work for me, so I'm going to do this instead and see if that works. So yes, don't be afraid to mix things up, I suppose, and get out there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great way to, dip your toe in the water for networking without kind of having to go hardcore straight away. Start to practice, when people ask you what you do, start to practice your, getting that out there without going, oh, I'm just a freelancer. Start to practice telling people confidently what you do, because I think that's the most important thing, that, people want to feel your confidence, that you want to work with someone who really loves what they do. And people kind of feel that energy and that enthusiasm kind of oozing out of you. So make sure you're doing something that, makes you feel that energy when people ask you what you do.
Yeah. And if you lack confidence, have a pre-prepared pitch. Have your pitch and go in with that. And that just gets the conversation started. And from then, once you're off, you're running. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then start asking questions about other people. I think a lot of the time with networking, people think, oh God, I'm going to have to go and just talk about myself. But actually go and ask questions. And that's a really good way to kind of find out about people and maybe find out about what problems they have, find out, actually you can then drop them a message the next day and say, oh, I was just thinking about that thing that you've got, and actually maybe we'd be a good fit because of this. So yeah, I think go, the same with marketing, make it about other people. Make it about finding out what their problems are. And that's a really good way to build relationships as well.
We've covered loads of ground this afternoon. I just wondered, if you had to boil it down to 3 key pieces of advice for someone who wanted to start out on their own freelance journey, what would they be?
See yourself as a business. Join communities, other freelance communities for a start, and find your niche.
Brilliant. Short and sweet.
Yeah, we've covered those already, but I think those for me are definitely the most important.
Yeah, perfect. Finally, can you tell our listeners where they can connect with you online, please, Sophie?
Of course, yeah, LinkedIn's the best place to find me. So I think if you type in Sophie Cross, Freelancer Magazine, you'll find me. And then freelancermagazine.co.uk is our website.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. I've really enjoyed our chat. It's been really interesting.
Me too. Thank you
Cheers.
so much for having me.
Thank you. Nothing quite beats the advice from someone who's been there, done it and got the t-shirt. And Sophie had loads of great advice there for anyone thinking of starting out as a freelance. Her recommendations included things like putting aside a pot of money to see you through the lean periods, opening a separate business bank account, doing your due diligence before working with a new client, and making the most of networking opportunities and co-working spaces. We'll include further advice and resources for those of you considering becoming freelance in the summary notes, as well as links to Sophie and the Freelancer Magazine. And you'll find these at www.startyourownbusinesspodcast.co.uk. You can also find out more about our sponsor, Sage. If you've enjoyed the show, please hit follow so that you're notified about new episodes as soon as they drop. All that remains is to thank Sophie once again for taking the time to talk to us today. Until next time, all the best.